Hello, welcome to Megan Chitwood Live, powered by BNI. In this episode, we are talking with Haley Jones, Jones team. Haley and I go way, way back. We were reminiscing. Two awesome things about Haley that we're going to be talking about today. One is her podcast, Straight Out of Prison Podcast. Yep, you heard me say prison. So you need to get the inside story on all of that. And then the other is their consulting and coaching programs that they have as well. So let's get started. And as a reminder, you can catch our show every Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. And you can also catch it on Instagram and LinkedIn as a recording as well. Haley, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for inviting me. I've been so excited about it.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about, because I just think this is so cool and unique, is your podcast. I think it sets you apart from most people, because you and your husband James are telling an amazing story of your lives on this podcast. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, it's been so fun, actually. And it's funny because we launched Team Jones in March of 2020, and podcast was not on the plan. It was not on the storyboard, not in the vision. And so probably about October, James was like, I really feel like I want to tell my story and how it becomes our story via podcast, on a podcast. And I was like, okay, because I was not really a podcast listener, neither was he. So anyway, long story short, he ordered a microphone off Amazon, and a couple weeks later, we went down to our basement and just started telling the story. And it kind of started, and it's continued this way, but just me being the Oprah of the show, so to speak, interviewing him, asking questions, kind of like digging out, because his memory is unbelievable. He has a kind of an underdog story, I guess, where he made some just bad decisions early on, had a rough childhood, and ended up going to prison at age 20. And so it just tells that story and about his life in prison and kind of his transformation and getting out and how he stayed out and what's kind of led him to where we are today. So it has been unexpected and super fun.
Yeah, well, and James was a BNI member. He's not currently, but he was a BNI member as well, and he was very open to everyone about his past. He's never kept it a secret. But what I love, because I have listened to almost every episode, I tell Haley I binge on them, so I listen to them like 3 at a time.
I love that.
But what is so amazing is how the two of you came together, and now on the podcast you have moments where you say, oh my gosh, I never knew that. And I thought to myself, yeah, going in this much detail, I probably wouldn't know. I try to think of like my husband, like I don't know this level of detail about any level, any part of his life either. So it's really interesting, and even your dynamic as you're finding out about things you just never heard about before.
Right. It is fascinating because he's a journaler. And so he has dozens of notebooks dating back from 1995. So, when do you ever have an opportunity to okay, tell me about this, in detail? And he's kind of rereading to refresh his memory. But it's been I would say almost every episode I'll learn something I didn't know.
Yeah, it's wild. And I love how you're starting to come into you're going to start to enter the story soon as you continue, which is just both of your stories and how you're working together and all of that is so fascinating as well.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because that you mentioned this, because I think and I love that you asked me to be on here. Thank you so much, because BNI was such a huge part of my story when moving to Alabama, and even meeting James, how we met each other. So
Would
it's,
you, do you think you would have met him if it weren't for BNI? Because I knew you guys in two different chapters, but I don't know if BNI was a catalyst for you to meet.
yes, it was, because when I
Oh,
was starting the chapter in Gardendale, Alabama, is when he had his second restaurant there. And I went in there recruiting him, speaking to his
oh,
manager to join my chapter in Gardendale. So that's how we
that's
met.
awesome.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. So
Yeah.
that is an interesting part. So you landed, you were living out of the country before you landed back in Gardendale.
Yes. So I lived in Europe for 8 years. I was mainly based in Sweden. I was based in London for a little bit, but I traveled and worked around Europe before moving to Birmingham, July 2010.
And yeah, so tell a little bit about what that was like, because Haley, for the director consultants who might listen to this, globally, Haley was one of those people who called us up and said, "I want to start a chapter." And you say, "How long have you been in the place where you are?" And she was like, 5 minutes, but I'm going to do it anyway, which you did. So it was a pretty amazing story of you just never quit until you figured it out.
It's funny because I forgot about that part until you just mentioned it, but that is true. When I couldn't find a seat available for insurance, which I was working at State Farm at the time, doing their marketing. And so I decided, well, I may as well start a chapter, where the business is located, where the office is located. And when he first reached out, or I filled out the form or whatever, he said, "So there's two things we look at, and that is, how long you've been in your industry and how long you've been like kind of planted or living where you're going to start a chapter, because that kind of determines how many connections you have and all that." I was like, "Well, we're going to get a big fat zero on both of those, because I've only been here like 2 months and I just started this new job in a new industry a month ago." So,
Yeah. Can I still do it though? Which you
right.
did. You did it. You absolutely did do it. And I think that goes to your work ethic, even about even growing your business. You just never stop until you figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like it's definitely a journey of like learning. And I think anybody can relate to that. I mean, we're constantly learning and growing. And I personally, I think it's the most important thing um, in any adventure you embark on, is just your willingness to learn and keep trying until you figure out a way that works or works best for you.
Yeah. So talking about you doing consulting and working with businesses and helping them grow, tell us a little bit about that element of what you do.
So we do the Team Jones profile. That's our main tool that we use. And that profile, we use the Enneagram. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a type of personality assessment. The DISC profile, which is another form, the Strength Finder, which is a book, the Gallup version of that, and a thing called motivational gifts, and then kind of curated questions depending on the organization we're working with or the people we're working with. We do work with individuals and mostly small businesses, I would say up to 50 employees, nonprofits, but we've even been working with some counselors, some therapists that have asked us to profile their clients. And then the therapist will use that tool in her sessions, not with us, but we just create the tool for her to use.
So a lot of times we hear about people using Enneagram. How do you bring all of that together?
So all of those different
All
assessments.
the different modes, yeah, together to get a really bigger picture than you would with any one of those tools, right?
Right. Well, what we found with personality assessments is it really is just kind of a small piece of the puzzle of who someone is, like how they're wired, how they think. But then you also have to introduce the experiences that they've had and how that has shaped them and what they've learned, and how you process information and communicate, react to other people. So we just have tried to introduce as many as we can to get a fuller picture. And the questions are really essential too, to really sit down one-on-one. We sit down and interview, if you will, each person that we're working with, to just try to get an idea of like who they are, how they're wired. And so I guess your question was, how does it work? Was that your question? I'm sorry.
Well, and just how does it give you a bigger, better picture than any one of the tools? So I guess in the creation of saying this is our Team Jones profile,
Right.
What made you say, let's dump all of this together and so that we can get a complete picture of who you are?
Well, how it all started was James worked at the Foundry, which is a nonprofit it's a nonprofit, but it works with people in recovery or coming out of prison. He was the director of the outreach and the food service program there. And so in that particular situation, he did have a team of about 4 paid staff, but most of his team made up of about anywhere from 26 to 32 men that were in the recovery program. So they're working like it's a job, but not getting paid. And so he realized that it's very hard to motivate people that are working for you that are not getting paid. And so he kind of deep dove into like, how can I understand them better? How can I connect with them and get them, excited about being here and really just kind of doing their job and doing it well? Because in that particular scenario, I mean, he was putting out 1,000 meals a day, working with Walmart, Publix, all these donations coming in. I mean, it's a pretty big operation. So he needed them on board. So he started he just called it like, I'm going to profile them. And it was kind of a joke, because you think of criminal profiling, like I'm going to profile them just to try to understand. And so he and I sat down together and like, okay, you need to do the disc, you need to do this to try to. And so, so we did that and realized like within that program, he had about a 70% turnover rate of people leaving the program or leaving his service area. And after, I think it was about 3 or 4 months after starting the profiles, he had a 90% rate of people coming and staying the entire program. So as he likes to put it, which is kind of funny, his department was the armpit of the Foundry. I mean, who wants to work in food services? And I mean, it's just hard work to kind of the Cadillac. Everyone wanted to be a part of that program. And he really attributed it to the profiles because he profile them and then he would print it out, get their picture, hang it on the wall. And so people were fascinated to see themselves up there, number one, but also people they were working with to understand like, oh, that's why you did that. And it just became, the environment just became a lot more lively, a lot more open, a lot more healthy, that people just really enjoyed being there. So that's kind of where the idea began.
So I do find it absolutely fascinating, going back to the podcast and what you talked about on the podcast. And then when I think about it from a business perspective, because I just can't help myself, right?
Right.
How
Yeah.
much overlap and how much you can learn about how do I apply this to business. And that's a great example. If you can get volunteers to do something, you sure as heck
Right.
can use the same tool and get people that you're paying to do something as
Right.
well.
I mean, another great example, just speaking like through the business lens that you're talking about, we went into a small business. There were 7 team members. And once we did specifically the strength finder, and one of the team members that was in sales that was selling one particular line, his main strength was competition, but there was no one else competing with him, I guess, in the sales division. And so he realized that, or his boss realized, I don't know if that's a proper word, realized that he thrived on some kind of competition. So they moved someone over into his department that did sales with him. And so it created this element of competition, and his sales went up. It was 30% in the next 6 months.
Just a
So that's, I
small,
mean, it's
simple little thing.
fascinating understanding one little thing, one little tweak that can make a big difference. So
Absolutely, 100%. I actually ended up with one of my biggest opportunities ever because I did Strengths Finder. I realized ideology was one of my biggest strengths. And when someone
mm,
came to me and said, it really like sounded like they needed to bounce ideas and I was like, I'm awesome at that. Like, because the profile
yeah,
said so. I'm awesome at that. Let me help you. And it turned into, I was a really good fit for it. But the confidence of knowing what my strength was,
right.
I would have never put myself out there like that if I hadn't been like, oh yeah, you want to bounce ideas? I'm your girl.
Right, exactly, and I think it's just putting a name to what you know is already there.
Yeah,
What you're like,
absolutely.
you can't like, "I can now, I'm kinda good at like this, doing this," but when you know, "Oh, it's this that I'm good at," so you're able to kind of define it and know how it fits into other situations or your current situation.
Absolutely. So let's talk about more about your BNI experience. You attribute BNI a lot to
Yeah.
where you are. Say a little bit about, tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I mean, so I moved from overseas. We kind of spoke about that. I decided to start a chapter. My background is actually education and counseling. I have 3 different degrees, all in that realm. So when I moved to Alabama, I could not find a job to save my life. This was back in 2010, which I thought would not be a problem because I did have good 8, 9 years experience under my belt. I had done a lot of things, but also I was willing to do a lot of things. It wasn't like I was shooting for one particular job. So it was one of the first times, maybe the first time in my life, like I put everything out there and was not able to make anything happen. And I
So,
realized,
so because you're going to tell your story, I want to drip. You guys need to listen to the Straight Out of Prison podcast so that you can start following Haley and get her entire story. I think that was divine intervention that you ended up working
oh,
with your dad, right?
no doubt, no doubt. I mean, just
Right?
the whole thing, how the pieces fell into place, because I would have never changed careers. I mean, I feel like I liked what I was doing, but hindsight's 2020. I wasn't like coming alive with it, like, oh, I love this, you know. So yes, I started working for my dad because I couldn't find a job, which I did not want to do. But he had a state farm agency. He wanted me to do his marketing. I know that I have a natural bend towards that, but I have no training, no background, no education in it. And so I jumped on board, and soon after, someone invited me to a BNI meeting, and I went to Birmingham's Best, which was one of the biggest chapters in the area at the time. I think it still is, I'm not sure. And when I went to that meeting, I was blown away. I was like, yes, and yes, this is what I need. I mean, just being connected to people and meeting new people, being new to the area. I mean, new back in the country. I'd never lived in Alabama before. But as much as that is what struck me is the resources that were available to me as I was trying to grow a business, grow in sales, helping out in an area that I did not have any training in. So I did feel unqualified at the time to do what I was doing, but I felt like when I got introduced to BNI, I feel like I was presented this just array of resources and materials that I could really sink my teeth into and learn something. I mean, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hydrant with just information and education, and it was free. I mean, I'd say it's free, but if you join, but I mean, it's offered to you with the membership. And to me, that was just, it was so exciting. I can't tell you how exciting it was when I was exposed to BNI.
Well,
So,
and I think for those who haven't visited BNI chapter who might be listening, really it is that, right? Like we can't even describe what it is until you see it. I know that's kind of a cop out on marketing and all things, but I
right.
literally have a goal of everyone just going and seeing what it's about because I think it's also a very cool community of people who can really help with all kinds of resources for businesses and for individuals as they're getting started. It's just an easy place to find good quality people to do services and products for you.
Absolutely. And I mean, speaking of good quality people, I mean, that was the big piece of it too, is that it was just an opportunity to establish relationship and connections, you know, in personally, but also just in a business sense. And it created some accountability for that for myself and for others. And I mean, a lot of those relationships I'm still in contact with today, actually. So, yeah, so I fell in love with it. And like I kind of mentioned, I couldn't find an open seat with the insurance, which is where I was working at the time. And so that's when I decided like I'm going to start my own chapter. So,
Yeah, and obviously that process looked very different for you because you didn't have this huge list of people that you already knew and all those kinds
right.
of things. But you successfully did it.
Yeah, it was fun. And like I said, I mean, I think if you look at it as an opportunity to reach out and to connect with people like in this little Gardendale, Alabama, which is where I started. And I wasn't living in Gardendale at the time. I was living in Birmingham, but now I'm living in Gardendale. Just an opportunity to kind of, you know, make a presence and to let people know who I am, which was huge. So
Yeah. Excellent. Awesome. And then recently you did go away for a little while and because you had all like I said, the whole story. I think you're going to start going through in your podcast, but just an
Yes.
amazing story. And then you came back. Is there anything you want to share about the part of your story? Because I do think it's a great hook for just
The
like
part
I
of my
said, your
story when
your
I took
lives
my
are so
training.
interesting. Well, yeah, and your yeah, just the time that you were away from BNI as well was a
Yeah,
lot of things
so
going on.
it was. I got married and had a baby pretty quick. This was back in 2000, whenever she was born. I don't remember. It's all a blur, right? um,
Well, and
and
you had the like one of the fastest. You were with us on our team as you got married and all of those things. And I remember
yes.
watching you going, like, should I say something? Haley likes to do things fast. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Haley likes to do things
Yes, I do.
fast.
Well, I was a little older, especially in this area to get married, and my
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
husband was another level. I mean, he was 40 when we met. And
yeah,
so, we just kind of, they say when you know.
yeah.
So, we
Absolutely.
got married and had a little baby. But then about that time, my mom got sick and was diagnosed with cancer. And I mean, anyone who's been through that journey knows that can be up and down and changing all the time. And um, my dad had passed away at that time. So I just felt a need to kind of step in and was a caregiver and organizing the caregiving. And then I had boys. So life just started cranking up, with events, with big events. And so, yeah, so during that break, it was just a lot of family, I guess. I mean, now that I'm looking back at it, kind of establishing, but it was in that time that, James and I did a lot of talking about the business that we wanted to start and how it was going to happen. And so, yeah, when we then decided to like, okay, March of 2020, because that's an awesome time to start a business. We didn't know what was about to transpire after that,
Yeah,
obviously. But it was after kind of starting that, which is 7 years later, I guess, from when I kind of took my hiatus from BNI, that it was just a very natural thing to be like, okay, let's jump back in the
yeah,
pool of, BNI. Because I mean, I feel like we too, through our experiences and just the different areas that we've worked in, people and organizations, we have a lot to offer too, as far as connecting people. And I kind of wanted to get back in the game of meeting people, and
yeah.
because I love it. It's definitely something I enjoy and um, like doing. So
What is your biggest goal for your business now?
biggest goal for our business. Well, like I mentioned, the podcast was not a part of the business originally when we first started. That has kind of taken us by surprise, our audience, which we're really grateful for. And actually, most of our business clients come from our podcast audience at this point. So that has been unexpected, but great. I would say our goal the goal that we've made is that our media arm would continue to grow as we tell our stories
Yeah,
and start to tell other people's stories, because it's all connected, right, to our business coaching, and we all
yeah.
have a story to tell, and we can all learn from other people's stories. So, but I mean, as far as numbers wise, I don't know if that's what you're asking.
No,
Like,
just in general, just what it can be. It can be a qualitative, yeah, or it can be
okay,
quantitative,
so
either one. Yeah,
yeah, 2022, our goal is to have 25 businesses on board for
yeah,
our business coaching.
yeah.
So that's kind of
Awesome.
a hard numbers goal. But,
Yeah,
in that, I mean, we really believe that what we do is helping people on an individual level, but also in a business level, as well as growing your business, sales, whatever your goals may be. And I know they're different for everyone. We believe like this tool that we have is a way to kind of zoom in on something that can help you accomplish that for you or your team or your
well, and
clients.
it's interesting because like I feel like DISC as an example was really really big 15 years ago, and it's kind of bringing like behavioral styles and all those kinds of things are starting to have a resurgence. I think this is just my moment of thinking about it, is that we've been so disconnected by technology and then a pandemic, right? that this
Yes.
helps you really connect and understand people and really, and when you can really connect and you can really understand people, sales becomes no issue, retention of employees becomes no issue because you're
Right.
all a part of something and you're all a big part, part of a bigger team, and you just feel like you're part
Absolutely.
of something.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it's like the main line is, that we use like seek first to understand and then to be understood.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us just with the social platforms and like you said, the pandemic, everybody wants to like, make themselves heard, get their point across, and which is understandable, and I can respect that. But I feel like if we kind of take a step back and try to understand others before we do that ourselves, it's just
Right.
a lot more effective way to even get done what we're wanting to get done,
Yeah.
because if what you're sharing and what your stance is hitting a brick wall, and people don't want to hear it, then it's just not a good strategy.
Well, and it's a big difference between communication and connecting, right?
Right,
So there's a lot of communication happening right now, right? I'm telling
right,
you exactly how I feel and all those kinds of things,
right,
but we don't
exactly.
have that connection, right? We don't have that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Once we have that connection, then we can say. I always say, like, I love to have someone hear my actual voice because after you hear my voice, then when you get a text message from me, you know it's in this tone, right?
right,
Which is with a smile
exactly.
on my face, and
Right,
but if you don't know me at all, then again,
right.
it's that communication versus connection piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to
And
say, I'm kind of skipping back to this, but I feel like it's connected. But my journey with BNI and how it started and meeting people, and then in turn helping people asking me to help me learn about myself and really kind of what I'm doing now, which I have some certifications and education now in the coaching realm, but that
yeah,
was the connection point that you're talking about just really helped me understand myself and knowledge about myself come alive that has then guided and directed the next steps from here on out.
how do you think it did that? How do you think it helped you learn about yourself?
Well, it helped the resources, number one, but the people. So when you are in a group of people that are all committed to each other and committed to each other in a relationship, I mean, the power of one, the one-to-ones, I know that is the one of the BNI mantras, at least I think it is, is that when you have someone asking you intentional questions about you, about your business, and trying to learn you and understand you, it makes you think about it. Because a lot of times we can walk through and we don't even understand ourselves or what we're doing. So I think it's the relationship piece, but also just the structure of the meetings, in my opinion, and forcing you like 60 seconds. You're going to tell what you're doing, what sets you apart, and what you're looking for. I mean, in the beginning, when I first started, I'm like, what am I looking for? Like, what does set me apart? It makes you think about these things that you wouldn't otherwise think about.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yes, yeah, yep, you're absolutely right. I forget about how when you're thinking, yeah, what do you really want? And when someone asks you,
Right.
what is your goal and what are your accomplishments and all that.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so, I mean,
absolutely.
whether you're, like, in a sales position or, I mean, even a nonprofit or a business where you're trying to, I mean, it really helps you hone in on that I
Yeah,
think a lot of times we get just carried away with the busyness and the checklist and what I've gotta get done today that we kinda lose sight of, like, what is the goal and how can I get there, you know?
yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Yeah. Any last thing you would like us to know about you or your business that we haven't covered so far?
Well, we've covered quite a bit, I feel.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I just
so
wanna
I'll share one. Is
Okay.
when you're looking for the podcast, it's not straight out of prison, it's straight out of prison. I remember you saying that the
Yes.
older folks might have been searching for out of prison. It's
Yes,
straight out of
that's true.
prison.
And it's a
I
play on the
love,
straight outta Compton, so
yes,
but
I
also
love
and
it.
we have spun off 2 more podcasts. One is Narrowing the Gap, which I feel like I wanna
Yeah.
mention, and narrowing the gap from where you are to where you wanna be. So it's the teaching companion to the Straight Outta Prison podcast. We use that a lot in our coaching. It just walks through 12 things that James did actually coming out of prison, how he stayed out. The recidivism rate is very high. And it was this is kind of was birthed from a class that he taught 20 years ago to men and women coming out of prison. But since when I found the curriculum, I was like, this is great. I need this, for what I'm doing. So it's a great podcast to listen to if you're looking for like a next step, but yeah. And then also I'm going to, two more things is, the Team Jones company. And that's another thing. We have all these like caveats. It's teamjones.co, not com, not
Yes, there
com.
you go. Yep.
But I really wanted to say to you, Megan, like, just thank you for like letting me be a part of this, and just like the whole BNI. I know it's work and it is business, but it really is helping people and empowering people like me. Like, I think stories that you know about and stories that you don't know about. And I just appreciate you and just BNI in general. And I really do like credit it for a lot of where I'm at today, and then in turn where James and I are at today with our business. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it so much, Haley. All right, so next week, back to just me, a solo episode again. So I will be again be sharing. This one is going to be a little bit different because it's going to be less about BNI and it's going to be more about general business and knowing yourself. So I'm going to just talk about some of the things that has made me successful as I've been going forward. And with that, I hope you have a great week.